Okay.
Hello everyone and welcome to Rockley in the federal electorate of Moreton. I've got some state representatives here, my local councillor and my senator, Queensland senator as well, and the Deputy Premier here to hear about how this suburb's been affected by floods going on a year ago, but also back in 2011 and plenty of times in between as well, Luke.
Absolutely.
Luke, the local landowner, the local flood-affected member of my community, is going to talk to us about how he's been affected as well. This community, right beside a creek that floods regularly, has needed help, and thankfully the federal, state and local governments have combined in a way to give some hope to people like Luke who've been affected by floods, to make communities more resilient, but also to provide that helping hand. And I'll hand over to the Acting Premier, Stephen Miles, to tell us about that program.
Thanks so much, Graham. Today we pass a really significant milestone in the Resilient Homes Fund. This is the fund delivered by the Queensland and Australian governments to ensure that we don't just build back after the disastrous floods of last year, but that we build back better, that the homes that we put people back into are more resilient, that we avoid future flooding events for those households. Now over 130 Queenslanders have accepted our offers to purchase their properties, their flood-affected homes, voluntarily buying them back and taking them out of harm's way of future flood seasons. When we launched this program, it was the biggest of its kind in Australia's history and is now the most progressed in the country. We have made more than 180 offers to homeowners across the local government areas of Brisbane, Ipswich, Logan, Sunshine Coast, Fraser Coast, Gympie, Moreton Bay and Lockyer Valley. Most of these homeowners were affected by the floods last year, many also affected by earlier flooding events, especially 2011. The program is now allowing those homeowners to move on without the fear that every summer their home will be flooded again. It gives them a chance to get their families and their properties out of the flood zone. And if you think of what that means for the new year, for people going into 2023, being able to start off fresh in a property that they know won't flood, I'm sure that's an incredible relief to people like Luke, who we have here, and thank him for letting us hold this press conference at his property, one of the 131 homeowners who we have now settled contracts with to buy their properties and allow them to move on. I'll turn to the Federal Minister for Disaster Recovery, Murray Watt, and then we'll hear from Luke also.
Thanks very much, Stephen. It's a great pleasure to join with my good friend, the Acting Premier, Stephen Miles, and some other really good friends who are really effective representatives for this local area at both state, federal and council levels. As Stephen said, today is a really important milestone for what I think is a very important resilience program for South East Queensland as a whole. This is a very innovative program. I think Queenslanders are familiar that back after the 2011 floods there was a smaller example of this home buyback program in the town of Grantham in the Lockyer Valley, which of course suffered devastation and resulted in over 100 homes being purchased back. And we saw the benefits of that buyback program in the most recent floods, where the people who had moved to higher ground in Grantham had managed to escape the floodwaters this time around. And that's what we want to see as a result of this program as well. As Stephen said, over 180 offers to buy back homes have now been made to homeowners in South East Queensland in the most at-risk flood areas. We know that not every part of Queensland is going to be suitable for a home buyback, but there are some areas that flood so regularly that it's in homeowners' interests and frankly taxpayers' interests to buy back those homes and get them out of harm's way, particularly in areas that see rushing floodwaters that put people in danger. Just as we arrived today, Graham and Peter, as the local members, were talking to us about the fact that in this very street the floodwaters reached window level. And we know, unfortunately, that as a result of climate change, we are likely to see more intense and more frequent natural disasters. So that's why it's so important that we take action now to make sure that we're prepared for the future. What we've said in the Albanese government ever since coming to power is that in the natural disaster space, what we want to do is make sure that the entire country is much better prepared for the disasters that we know are coming and is much more resilient for those types of disasters that we know unfortunately are going to come. And programs like this are a very good example of states and federal governments working closely together to achieve just that, making sure we're better prepared and more resilient for what's coming along in the future. I'll hand over to Luke in a moment just to talk to you a bit about what this program means for him and other homeowners like him. But I did want to also mention that we face very serious flooding right now in other parts of the country, particularly in the Kimberley in Western Australia. I was actually in Adelaide yesterday with the Premier Malinowskis, and his Emergency Services Minister Joe Sockarch to visit some of the floodwaters that are now creeping their way down the Murray River in South Australia. And as we speak, there's very significant flooding occurring in the Kimberley, particularly in areas around Fitzroy Crossing. We have been working very closely with the Western Australian Government about managing that disaster. That is, of course, a very remote part of the country with a large number of small, remote, disadvantaged Indigenous communities. So that's why we've been working so closely with the Western Australian Government over the last few days to make sure that people are kept out of harm's way. Now, Fitzroy Crossing and a number of other communities are cut off by those floodwaters at the moment. And as a result of that, late last night, I approved, on behalf of the Albanese Government, a request from the Western Australian Government to supply Defence Force personnel and aircraft to support Western Australia's effort in relocating people out of Fitzroy Crossing and out of some of the surrounding communities. Because of the scale of that disaster, the evacuation facilities in Fitzroy Crossing are already at capacity, and that's why we have now acted very swiftly with the Western Australian Government to mobilise ADF personnel and aircraft to support the relocation of people from those communities into Broome, where they will be out of harm's way. But that weather system is evolving. It's still dumping a huge amount of rain in Western Australia, and there are some reports that it may come back in off the coast, potentially back into Northern Territory. So I guess while today we reflect on the positives about people moving forward, and I know that people have really experienced a lot of fatigue from disasters over the last 12 months, these things that are happening at the moment show that this has got a long way to go, and we're just asking people to stay very closely informed of emergency warnings no matter where they are in the country. But Luke, would you like to just come forward and just have a little chat about what this has meant for you?
Thank you. I'm welcome to some questions, but...
So, Luke, tell me about what happened here to your home in February. Can you kind of move me through?
Yeah, absolutely. So in February 26, we had the deluge that ended up submerging the home, well above head height. The home's been uninhabitable now for the last 9 months.
And did you lose everything inside the house?
Yeah, absolutely. Everything that we had, the earthly possessions, were written off.
And how did that kind of feel, to see everything that you owned, submerged?
Fresh beginnings. Absolutely. Things burden us, and we don't realise that those things, we become slaves to those things. What I realised was, as part of this, we don't actually need a lot in our lives to continue forward. So it was enlightening.
And it's coming up to a year now. Can you tell me, how you're going at the moment? Where are you now?
Yeah, so we've enjoyed living here. We've moved on to Maruka, and we're excited to get a new sense of being in that community. It's an exciting time.
Have you felt a bit of a sense of anxiety with every weather event since the floods? And I guess, how does it make you feel knowing that coming into this year, you're out of the flood zone?
Yeah, absolutely. That's the main part, is that the buyback program means future residents, Queensland residents, don't have to deal with the anxiety, the stress, or the challenges that come with a property that frequently floods, that is subject to water. I don't want to say that I've become more resilient to the anxiety, but I've been more accustomed to it. Moving to Maruka, we haven't had the same deluge that we've had recently, in February, but it's absolutely assuring, especially for our family. My wife especially is concerned when it rains. It's a different feeling. When you're in a flood-affected property, that sound of rain on the roof is not reassuring, it's not calming.
It's not the March, the rains are here at the moment. But this program that, as Murray was talking about, the other states, the state and federal have worked together to essentially enable us and future residents of Queensland to rest easy when there is a rain event.
How long had you been living here before the home became inhabitable?
6 years.
Had you seen anything like that before?
We hadn't seen that level. We missed the 2011, but we do get, when rain happens, flash flooding does come through here. So we've seen it a few times, and we had an evacuation plan that we had crafted out for us, and we enacted that on the 26th. So the flooding that we had was good that we were able to prepare to a certain extent.
Did you expect it to come up that high though?
No, not at all. I had friends and family call me saying, "Are you okay?" And I'd come here, and we've seen the floodwaters, and it was about 1 metre high, and it looked like it was receding. I was like, "Guys, we've dodged a bullet. It's receding. It's fine. It hasn't come to the house." I came the next day, and that was when the water was already in the house, and that was the start of the new adventure.
What's your next step in moving forward?
So we've cherished living here. It's been great. We are ready. We've moved to another suburb, neighbouring suburb, Maruka, and we're looking to create that new sense of being and kind of help become part of that community. So that's our plan. It's an exciting time.
Is it bittersweet? I mean, this was your home of 6 years, and I guess you've got a new home now, but is it sad to say goodbye to this one?
We've cherished the moments here, and we always will. We are ready to move on though, and we're looking forward to what the future holds for us.
Thanks, Luke.
Thank you.
Thanks, Luke.
Yeah.
Thanks, mate.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I might get that. So we've had 180 offers, but 130 have been accepted. What's been, I guess, the reason why those 50 haven't been accepted?
Like any property purchase, this process takes time. We need to settle on agreed prices, settle on a contract, settle on a settlement date, and so there's nothing unusual about having made 180 offers, and so far 131 have been accepted. All up, we expect to purchase at least 500 properties with this program.
What happens next to those properties purchased?
To some extent that will depend on the location of the property, but they will in most cases be demolished and ownership transferred to the local government, and in most cases that allows them to be added to parkland and creek reserve, that kind of thing. As you can see, that would be entirely appropriate here.
There's other parts of the program as well. How many homes have been raised and how many retrofits have occurred?
So from the house raising and retrofitting process, we've distributed 2,234 assessments. Over 100 grants have now been made for more than $6 million worth of building work. Understandably, the process for raising and retrofitting does take longer. We need to finalise and agree on plans, on funding amounts, and source builders and contractors.
Has there been more delays because of worker shortages? Is it rolling out as fast as you would like it to roll out?
We'd always like it to roll out faster, but we've always known that this process would take years. If you've ever done any kind of renovating of a home, it takes time, often longer than you would like it to. Particularly in a time of building supply and builder shortage, which we of course are experiencing here in Queensland. I do have some good news on that front though. The QBCC is reporting an increase in the number of licensed tradespeople in the state. 9,017 new licensees were approved in the 2021-22 financial year. That's an increase of more than 1,200 on the previous financial year. So we are seeing an increasing number of tradies moving here and finishing their apprenticeships here, getting licensed here, and that's good news for people looking to have their homes raised or retrofitted. Of course, also good news for anyone else looking to do building work.
Some people still have, flood mud in their homes for nearly a year. What's your message to them, people particularly who, haven't had the same answers as they have had here?
My message to them is to keep working with us. This is a massive program backed by billions of dollars, and we are absolutely determined to use those funds as well as we can to take care of as many Queenslanders as we can. Some of the processes will take time. They always do. These recovery processes always do take time, but we have these programs available for the first time. They are, as we've said, an Australian first. People from around the world are looking to this program to guide them in how to make their communities more resilient going forward. So to anyone who's applied for these programs, please be assured that we are making sure every available resource is available to get people back into appropriate accommodation as quickly as possible.
A question for Minister Watt on something else, if that's okay. Queensland taxpayers are now having to pay to fly doctors out to regional and remote parts of the state because the federal government hasn't changed the criminal code to allow voluntary assisted dying services to be provided via telehealth. There hasn't even actually been a commitment that that law will change. Do you think it needs to be changed?
Well, that is something that the federal government is giving consideration to. I commend the Queensland government on taking actions to legalise voluntary assisted dying. It's an important right, I think, for people no matter where they live in a state like Queensland. The reality is that being such a decentralised state has always impose difficulties on rural and regional Queenslanders in accessing health services. That's not a new phenomenon, and we are giving consideration to how we can best ensure, working with the state government, that Queenslanders can take up that option if of course they choose to do so and go through all the relevant processes.
Well, the federal government's been considering it for more than 6 months. In the meantime, Queensland, as you said, the most decentralised state in Australia, the scheme's come into effect. It's about to come into effect into South Australia. Why is there a hold up on this? How long is it going to take to consider?
Well, I'm not going to put a time frame around it. These are obviously delicate matters. You're dealing with literally with people's lives. We have had discussions with the Queensland government about this over a period of time, and let's not forget this is a relatively recent reform. The former federal government didn't do anything about this issue. It's something that we are now looking at, and we'll continue those discussions with Queensland.
And just to get the acting premier on that, are you disappointed that there's been such a delay in moving on this?
I understand why it has taken time, but the Queensland government would continue to encourage the Australian government to make those changes. We were particularly disappointed that the Morrison government refused to do so, leaving regional and remote Queenslanders disadvantaged when compared with their city counterparts.
And what reasons have you been given for the delay? I mean, this legislation was passed more than a year ago.
We've been advised that it's under consideration, but clearly we think these changes should be made, and we'd encourage the Australian government to conclude those considerations as quickly as they can.
A report today says Queenslanders are paying 27% more on power bills than other states. Is the Queensland government doing enough to ease cost of living pressures?
I don't think that report should surprise anyone. We know power prices have been going up, and they were predicted to continue to go up. That's why the Queensland and other state and territory governments agreed with the Australian government to make an extraordinary market intervention to cap the input price for coal and gas generators. That report predated those decisions, and we certainly hope and expect that those decisions will put downward pressure on power prices. The Queensland government is taking short, medium and long-term action to relieve the pressure that we know power prices put on household budgets. In the short term, we have been able to provide to households more than $1 billion of rebates directly onto their electricity bills out of the dividends we make from owning our generators. So Queensland households own our electricity generators, and in return, when prices have been pushed higher, we are able to use the dividends from those GOCs to rebate back to customers. $575 so far in cost of living rebates to households. In the medium term, we were very pleased to work through the National Cabinet with the Australian government and the other states on a plan to cap coal and gas prices that will relieve the component of cost pressure that was caused by global factors, particularly the war in the Ukraine. And then in the longer term, over the next 10 years, we'll continue to drive down the cost of power for households by converting our electricity system to renewables. 50% renewables by 2028, 70% renewables by 2032. That will allow us to reduce power prices. Indeed, the modelling that sits behind our Energy and Jobs plan showed that thanks to that plan, household power prices would be lower than they would be if we hadn't converted to renewables. So you can see very strong action there in the short, medium and long term.
In the short term, though, do you think these rebates are enough, though?
Well, these rebates are only possible because we continue to own our electricity generators, but we look forward to seeing the impact that market intervention will have on household power prices. It's certainly expected to have a downward effect on power prices. I understand there are some market indications that it is already beginning to work.
Question for Minister Warren. China has threatened to take countermeasures against countries imposing COVID screening requirements. Are you concerned Australia's decision to do this could lead to further trade sanctions?
Well, obviously, every country will make its own decisions around how it manages COVID and the reactions of other countries. But again, can I make the point that we think that this is a modest measure, simply asking people who are getting on a plane, coming here from China, to have a PCR test or a RAT test within 48 hours of getting on that plane. I don't think that that's a drastic step, and it's similarly, it's identical to the steps that have been taken by more than a dozen other countries in Europe, in North America, and in Asia. So it's a matter for China what they decide to do, but this is a modest measure taken out of an abundance of caution, and we think it's the right step to take.
What do you think they're referring to when they say countermeasures?
Oh, look, I'm not going to speculate for what the Chinese government might be saying. That's a matter for them.
You say it's a matter for them, though, but do you think it'll hamper progress made by your government?
Well, I think one of the most pleasing things that occurred at the national level over the last few months since the election of the Albanese government is the beginning of stabilising the relationship with China. And putting my agriculture minister hat on for a moment, that's really important for so many of our agricultural commodities and for farmers who've lost markets in China. So we, of course, want to see that relationship stabilised, but at the same time we have a responsibility to take the steps that are necessary to keep the Australian people safe. And all I can do is repeat the fact that this is something that nearly over a dozen other countries are doing. We're not doing this as a one-out, and it's an important step, and I'm sure that efforts will continue going on to stabilising that relationship with China.
What do you think of claims by China that imposing these requirements is discriminatory?
Well, I disagree with that view. As I say, the reason that we have taken this step is because of concerns that have been echoed by the World Health Organization that China is not being transparent around its data relating to COVID infections. We know that China is experiencing a wave of COVID infections at the moment as a result of their decision to open up. And the big concern that we have is that lack of transparency means that it's not possible to keep track of variants as they are developing. We think that's really important to do. And so that's why we've taken this step. That's why so many other countries have taken this step. And we think that that's in the interest of the Australian people.
Do you think that Beijing is behaving hypocritically given that it demands the same screening of international passengers?
I'm not going to get into labelling other countries and the steps that they take. That's a matter for them. My responsibility as a member of the Albanese government is to do what's right for Australians, and that's what we think we've done here. Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Do you mind if we just do a quick group shot?
Yeah, we'll just move this away, guys.
No problem.